Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Conversation with Idaho Governor John Evans. Good evening. Idaho Governor John Evans said again today that Idaho farmers who have suffered losses due to a terrible grasshopper invasion in southern Idaho should be reimbursed by the federal government, even if they do not have federal crop insurance. We'll be talking about the grasshopper problem and its economic and political consequences with the governor tonight. That's one of our topics, among others. The governor has just returned from the National Governors Conference in Tennessee. It's good to have you here, sir.
Thank you for being with us
tonight. How could these farmers be reimbursed?
Well, what I hope I'll be able to convince Senator McClure and the congressional delegation to introduce a special piece of legislation to appropriate enough money to pay at least part of the costs and the losses that have been suffered by the farmers throughout Idaho from what I call the federal hoppers. Unfortunately, the federal agencies were not timely in their recognizing the problem, moving very rapidly to spray and control the grasshoppers. So those farmers that are potentially surrounded or on the perimeter of the BLM land, that they've suffered severe damage as a result of no fault of their own. So I think that it's just fair to recognize that those losses were suffered as a result of some negligence on the part of the federal agencies involved, and that the federal agencies now should step forward and help us out from under this situation.
Any indication from Senator McClure or others that they would be willing to do that?
Not as yet. I've not been able to get a hold of Senator McClure as yet, but we're hopeful that he'll be supportive of at least recognizing the federal responsibility in this particular case. I've asked Senator John, or the Secretary John Block, Secretary of Agriculture, to declare all of southern Idaho a disaster area. We've not received that declaration from the Secretary. I received a letter from the Secretary this morning after making a phone call to him yesterday, of which I could not contact him. He's emphasizing in the telegram I received this morning that he's pleased to advise that the USDA will provide the resources to help treat the most critical grasshopper infestations on federally owned rangeland in Idaho. Well, that just doesn't go far enough. The $400,000 they've allocated is not going to be enough money. It's coming too late. And those farmers and ranchers who've already suffered the devastation of the infestation of those hordes of grasshoppers need to be repaid for their losses in some way.
If that doesn't happen through congressional authorization, are we talking about some farmers really going out of business as a result of this?
Well, I'm sure that there'll be some that will be so severely damaged by the losses that they could easily go bankrupt. You know, we've got a great number of farmers in the state that are in very sensitive, marginal position right now. The high interest rates, the heavy loans they have against their farms, it's been very difficult for them to make their payments of principal and loans to whatever organization they may owe it to. So it could possibly be that we'll see farmers going out of business. That was one of the reasons why I'll continue to strive to secure a disaster declaration for southern Idaho so that we can trigger some assistance to the farmers and ranchers who may be in that difficulty. For an example, this is not just a loss for right now. We're talking in terms of what happens in the fall. We're talking about some of the hay crops being devastated. Those hay crops may not come back. We're talking about some grain crops that are not going to be harvested. Where does the rancher get the hay to feed the cattle this fall? They're going to have to go to borrow money in order to save those herds. It could be devastating and so severe that we're going to have a disaster declaration so that the Farmers Home Administration can step forward and assist with their emergency loans.
I see you have the telex right there from Secretary Block. You have been, and people on your staff have been critical of the way this response has been handled. This is the first communication you've had directly from him?
This is the first communication. You know, we sent the first letter on July the 12th.
What's the problem?
I don't have any idea. In fact, that's what I wanted to talk to the secretary yesterday when I made the telephone call to find out personally what was the problem. Was it in his own personal office? Was it in his staff? Did he realize that we were getting no response at all from his department in his behalf? I think it's very embarrassing.
You didn't talk to him
No,
yesterday?
never. We're just not being able to get a hold of him. He was going on the road again this morning. He was supposed to have called me early this morning at home. I waited for the phone call. It never came.
And the announcement that the federal government would be providing $400,000 to treat some of the worst areas in the grasshopper infestation, that announcement came from the congressional delegation.
Right, and it's too little, too late. It should have come way early. 1979, we had a potential, very serious infestation, similar to what we've had this year, maybe not quite as severe. The federal agencies immediately got right on top of it. They sprayed the federal lands to keep it under control, so we never did suffer the devastation that we've suffered this year. In the Department of Agriculture, we've got an agency called the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS for short. That agency has the responsibility of contracting with the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service to spray their public lands when they have an infestation of insects of this kind. And so they were expecting the same thing to occur this year. The first week of July, APHIS notified the BLM that they did not have the financial resources to spray the public lands this year. I talked to the director of the BLM. He essentially said, we don't have the authority even to transfer money to use it for spraying. APHIS has always done that. So they were really in some trouble and were suggesting at that time, first of the month, that the farmers were going to have to use their own resources and they'd allow them to spray the perimeters of the BLM land. Well, that isn't answering the problem at all. As good neighbors and as good stewards and managers of land, we need to take care of our own responsibilities. The farmers of Idaho will spray on their own land. The federal agency should spray on their own land. And that's where it was broken down, is that those federal agencies did not move in a timely fashion to handle the grasshopper infestation. So that's essentially the reason why I think they're liable now for some losses that the farmers have suffered.
There are some, though, who are saying that even had the federal government provided more money to do a more widespread spraying, that it would have still been too late to really deal with the problem.
I don't think that's true. I think, once again, they're not talking in terms of timely action. If they had started when APHIS first notified my Department of Agriculture and my office that we're going to have a serious infestation of grasshoppers in July, if they had been able to move at that time and start the spraying, it could have been handled. What was really ironic is that the Secretary of Agriculture, John Block, has had the authority to secure the money all this time, and we didn't know that. All he had to do is what he did at the end of July, he could have done at the 1st of July. What he did was declared a disaster, an emergency, then had the authority to go to the Commodity Credit Corporation and borrow the money necessary to spray the public lands, as had always been the case in the past. Why wasn't that done on the 1st of July rather than the 30th of July? And that's why I'm saying timely application should have been applied, and it wasn't. It's like a wildfire, you know. If the BLM has a fire on the rangeland, they immediately go out and douse the fire, and then they go to Congress and secure the necessary resources through a special appropriation. There's no difference from a wildfire than a devastation from an infestation of grasshoppers. So it's an emergency circumstances. They should have moved. They knew it was going to be bad, yet here was the bureaucracy stumbling over each other through the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior that just weren't communicating well. And it's just fortunate that we carried the ball, and I called it the attention of our congressional delegation. I declared that emergency disaster, did everything I could to make sure that they realized this was going to be devastating to the farmers of Idaho.
Yet Senator Sims says you really didn't help very much at all, that you didn't cooperate.
Well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, I've never received a phone call yet from the junior senator from Idaho, and I think that's almost an embarrassment for that office.
Almost sounds like that was a political shot that he was taking at you, and maybe the start of the campaign.
Well, I don't know. It's inappropriate, inexcusable for him to make those accusations.
My train of questioning earlier was to see whether there was some political the playing of politics in this some way. Were they trying to embarrass you?
If there's any kind of politics to be played and to be won on this, it's going to be on the backs of our congressional delegation. They're the responsible parties to monitor and oversee those federal agencies. As soon as I alerted them, and they were alerted way back in the 1st of July, as soon as I alerted them, they should have alerted John Block and said, hey, we've got a serious problem. You better get out and take care of it right now. Apparently that did not happen. It took almost 30 days for them to get that machine into gear to get the resources. Now, next Monday, I've been assured that APHIS will be out in the field. They will be spraying those hot spots throughout the state that they've identified. Our Department of Agriculture at the state level, the BLM, and APHIS are all coordinating that effort to identify the very worst places that need spraying immediately.
What is this, on our program earlier in the week on this subject, the Associate Director of BLM for Idaho said that this was clearly a policy decision made in the Reagan administration not to engage in these spraying programs any longer, for budget reasons, perhaps something else. That's just a wrong decision on your, as you see it.
Absolutely. That's not managing public lands.
What does that tell you in a larger context about the Reagan administration's agricultural policy?
Well, obviously they're deserting agriculture, they're deserting the farmers and ranchers in Idaho. If they expect the farmers and ranchers to go out and spray the public lands for the grasshoppers like we've had to face doing this year, farmers and ranchers in Idaho don't have the financial resources to do those things. It's the responsibility of the managing agency, and if you haven't got the resources, John Block had the wherewithal, had the ability to secure the money on the 30th of July. He should have been able to secure it on the 1st of July just as well.
The Reagan administration, apparently on this sort of on the same subject, wants now to make a major effort to reduce the farm price support levels. I know you're leaving this afternoon to go to Chicago to address an agricultural conference. What about some of the ideas that the administration is floating on the farm front? Are they going to sell in farm states?
Once again, it's not going to sell in the farm states. We're going to have to continue to have support payments in agriculture for our critical crops. You know, this gets back to the issue of the federal deficit on our balance of payments, the strong dollar situation. The federal deficit in their financing there in Washington, D.C., not balancing our federal budget, all of that contributes to very high interest rates. As a result, we've seen our markets for agricultural crops just collapse overseas. The countries that we normally would sell those commodities to have the ability to buy those commodities from other countries at lower cost than they can buy it from the United States. So all of a sudden, the farmer's at the mercy of the high interest rate fiscal policy of this administration, and it's a truly terrible mistake. And once again, we're being forced into a very serious financial position here in Idaho as a result of that policy. And I just don't think the people of Idaho or the people of this nation, and particularly the farmers of this nation, are going to stand up and watch that whole program collapse.
Let me ask you, Governor, about the development today on the wilderness issue. A new wilderness bill was introduced in the House of Representatives today in Washington, calling for 3.4 million acres, which is somewhere up around what many of the environmental groups would like to see. That comes at a time when there seems to be no real progress on the negotiations that are going on between the natural resource industries on the one hand and the conservationists on the other hand. A standoff there. Is a bill possible?
Well, it's difficult to say. I was surprised that bill was introduced in the Congress today, because the indication that I had received from Congressman Seiberling, was that after he held the hearings, which were held on the 30th and 31st of this week, that he would then start looking at the bill and marking it up, coming to a compromise, be in touch with everybody. This was the congressman from Pennsylvania that was out here touring the area that introduced that particular bill. It came as quite a surprise to me this morning also.
Does that make it more difficult?
Well,
to arrive at a compromise?
Obviously, it means another set of figures, another proposal that we're going to have to take into consideration, and that what Congressman Seiberling is going to have to take into consideration. To me, that's too many acres. I think my recommendation is much more in tune with what's needed in Idaho than to talk in terms of 3.2 million more acres being put into wilderness.
So what would you where would you place the chances of getting a bill anytime soon?
Well, I'm still optimistic.
Out of the current Congress.
I'm still optimistic that we'll get that. It's going to take the efforts of Senator McClure once again. He's the chairman of the Interior Committee, and he will have to guide that through. Several states are relying on Senator McClure to get the logjam broke on those wilderness bills. I think that we can come to a compromise in that process. And I've been working in the background trying to get all of the people, the different factions in Idaho together to support a reasonable increase. And I think that reasonable compromise is very near the figure that I proposed.
You have rejected, if that's the right word, maybe you'd choose another word, a petition that was signed by many North Idaho county and local government leaders concerned about the wilderness proposal, concerned about going higher than the delegation's figure. They're concerned basically that anything more than about 500,000 acres would cost jobs in northern Idaho. You don't share that concern?
Well, I certainly share a concern. I just disagree with their particular position. I have to represent all of the people of the state of Idaho and recognize that they have some special interests within that area, as I have a concern for those special interests in Idaho. We've been working very closely with that whole delegation. Their initial position in relation, at least those who sponsored the meeting, was that we needed absolutely no more wilderness in Idaho. Then they were able to come around and support the congressional delegations. I have emphasized that they should really talk in terms of upping the ante to talk in terms of a figure close to mine, because I predicted that there could possibly be a move to increase the number of acres substantially. And according to the report from the Congress today, we now have another bill at 3.2 million acres introduced by the congressman from Pennsylvania, and that concerns me. Once again, we've got to put some brakes on here someplace. We've got to come to a compromise position. And I've not rejected that petition or their concerns. We just happen to disagree on this particular subject, and we'll be working very closely with them to establish a compromise that will be satisfactory to them as well as for us.
Another subject. Representative George Hansen is claiming that his reprimand this week by the Congress was really about a 90%, as he put it, vindication of his position and the way he's handled his finances. What do you think that reprimand means?
Well, it's pretty serious. You know, I heard in Tennessee when I left that it was a unanimous disapproval, a unanimous vote in opposition to what he had done. It was a split vote, but a very heavy majority of Republicans and Democrats alike voted to reprimand him. That's a pretty serious accusation against our congressman, and I think seriously he should consider the possibility of stepping aside.
You think he should quit?
I really do. I think with that reprimand, it's time to consider the interests of the people of the state of Idaho above his own personal interests, and consider the possibility of stepping aside and allowing the people in the Republican Party to select a candidate who can better represent them.
Do you think, as a convicted felon, that he would have the ability to vote under Idaho law?
I have some serious doubts that he'll be able to vote in November. But the Secretary of State's already asked the Attorney General for an opinion on that particular issue, and we'll be getting that soon so that we'll know for sure just exactly what the law would provide.
He claims that he is still representing his constituents in the 2nd District. Do you think he's representing them?
Not well. He of course, feels that he's representing the district, but once again, we've not had any input. For an example, on this grasshopper, this federal hopper, as I call it, situation, we've notified his office. We've had no input from his office nor from him on the situation. Most of the problems are within his congressional district. So I don't see how he can say that he's representing us well when he's not on the scene and not really taking part as much as he should.
Governor, as I mentioned earlier, you're just back from the National Governors Conference where Democratic and Republican governors seem to split right down the middle on the need for a tax increase, a federal tax increase. Do you agree with Vice President Mondale when he says that a tax increase will be needed next year regardless of who wins in November?
It would appear to me, and I had some real reservations when I heard Walter Mondale in his acceptance speech announce that he would face the issue very squarely, move in the direction as he feels will be necessary in 1985 to increase taxes in order to bring that budget into balance. He's talking in terms of not only severe cutbacks in many of the programs, but also an increase in taxes. And I really think that that's probably a realistic and honest position to take. And I think the President down deep in his heart realizes it too, that in time it's going to take. In fact, I thought at his last press conference he vacillated. At one point he said no increase in taxes, and then toward the end of the program he said, well, maybe it'll be necessary to look at those. Only time will tell if we can do it. I think if you're talking in terms of a $200 billion deficit annually for the next decade, and that's what the projections we received in Nashville this week, $200 billion annually for the next decade, there's no question in my mind that we're not only going to have to cut back a great number of the programs at the federal level, but also talk in terms of some increased taxes in some way. That is a realistic position to hold. And obviously it's not a popular position in the eyes of many people. But he's trying to be very honest in his convictions and telling the President that, well, are you going to be able to cut that far? The President's going to have to come forward and say, this is where I expect the cuts to be if he's going to maintain his credibility for no more tax increases.
David Broder, the political reporter for the Washington Post who writes a syndicated column, wrote a column from the Governor's Conference a couple of days ago where he listed you as one of the 10 or 12 incumbent Democratic governors who were almost certain to run for the U.S. Senate in 1986. Fair statement?
No, I didn't talk to David Broder. He didn't interview me. He didn't have permission to assume that I'm running for the United States Senate. That decision will be made down the road. I've got 2 years left in my term as governor of the state of Idaho, and I want to make it a very productive 2 years. So we're going to do everything we can to meet the needs of the people of the state of Idaho, continue to move Idaho ahead, diversify our industries, bring new industry to our Idaho. And,
well, the thrust of his column, though, was that there are so many Democratic governors who will either by virtue of their state constitutions have to make a choice about their political future in '86, or who will be in a position to go after a vacant seat or go after a weak incumbent, and that Democrats are going to go charging after those jobs. That's a safe assumption, is it not?
Well, I think
a lot of Democratic governors will find it very attractive.
Yes, I think there are a great number of Democratic governors who are putting themselves in position for a potential race. I saw that article in the paper, read through it with interest. I didn't realize there were that many governors that would be considering the possibility of a race in 1986, although I knew there were a great number. They're all good friends of mine. No, there is the potential, and there could be a good opportunity for governors who have been in office for 2 or 3 terms to make those steps into the federal Congress.
Back closer to home on the subordination front, Attorney General Jones says he wants now to change the Sunshine Law to force disclosure of advertising money that's spent for advertising on so-called issues ads, ads presumably like Idaho Power Company has run on the subordination issue. Would that be a good idea?
I think it's reasonable. You know, what the Sunshine Law, all it provides is we want the people to know what's going on, and if there's an effort on the part of some corporation to influence public opinion through their ads, influence the election of certain candidates or the defeat of other candidates in the process, I think it's reasonable to assume that maybe we should have an amendment to the law to provide for that. I'll be waiting with interest on what the Attorney General brings forward in legislation that would correct that.
Do you agree with him, too, that Idaho Power tried to influence the outcome of some elections back in
Oh, I don't think
May?
there's any question about that. They initiated their campaign that we've been listening to and watching for months now.
Is there
And
anything
just
wrong with that, though?
Well, I think as much as anything else, if they're going to do it, they have to be upfront about it and saying, you know, this is why we're doing it, and that's what they're not saying. They were trying to soften the blow for some of the supporters that were in some serious trouble. It wasn't very effective. There were only a few of those who had voted with Idaho Power in the Snake River Valley that were successful if they had a very serious opponent in the primaries.
Are you really making any progress in your negotiations on Swan Falls?
Oh, I think so. I think so. We've met twice now with the chairman of the board, Jim Bruce, and the Attorney General, and our staffs. And our staffs are meeting on a weekly basis to really try to identify the problem areas. When we put it all out onto the table and examined it very carefully, we were in agreement in more issues than we were in disagreement. And so I think we've made some progress. Hopefully we can settle down the fire that's being issued between the Attorney General and the Idaho Power.
Yeah, you've just assumed my next question. Has the Attorney General helped or hurt by this sort of day in and day out back and forth with Idaho Power?
I think both Idaho Power and the Attorney General are both guilty of the same thing. They're both challenging each other. At the same time, we're trying to negotiate an answer to the problem. I've asked them both to consider a truce, and we're hopeful that they'll be able to get together, we'll be able to get together and have a truce soon. Jim Jones said as soon as Idaho Power pulls their ads off of television and off of radio, then he'll consider pulling his off. He'll consider criticizing them. So only time will tell. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to get that done.
Well, Governor, it's good of you to join us tonight. We appreciate it, sir, very much.
Nice to be here, Mark.
All of us who work in public television in Idaho are hurting tonight. We are hurting over the loss of a friend and the loss of our boss. Jack Schlafly, the general manager of the Idaho Educational Public Broadcasting System, died this morning in Boise after a long and courageous struggle with cancer. To say that Jack Schlafly was the boss really doesn't do him justice. He, of course, was the boss, but he was also the founder, the guiding light, the protector, the advocate, the professional, and the innovator in our business. For many of us, he was also a mentor, the person who made the craft of broadcasting something worth dedicating yourself to. He was the founder, really, of this broadcast, and he stuck with us and me through thick and thin, encouraging, providing, and always prodding us to do a little better. It is no overstatement to say that public television as we know it, and as we hope you enjoy it, would not be what it is had it not been for Jack Schlafly. He did so very much, and we feel now that he has left us much too soon. And we know that it will be harder now without him. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.